10 years. No handshakes, no embrace, no mercy. Hyun-bin could negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking, but a single touch would flood him with the darkest corners of a person's soul, until a black maid with wise eyes and gentle hands placed her palm on his chest during a panic attack and gave him the first moment of peace he'd felt in a decade. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I have missed you all, missed all the experiences we've had together. It's been a rough ride, but trust me, we're getting everything back and running. So stick around. I need your support on YouTube now more than ever. Thank you specially for sticking around to this very moment. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now, back to the story. The glass conference room hung suspended over the Pacific like a crystalline cage, and inside it, Hyun-bin sat perfectly still while 6 men in expensive suits tried not to shake. He didn't need to raise his voice. He never did. The 3 feet of empty space surrounding him at all times said everything his silence didn't. "The Singapore deal closes Friday," he said, his words precise, measured. "No delays, no excuses." The men nodded in unison, their eyes fixed somewhere near his collar, never quite meeting his gaze. They'd learned. Everyone learned eventually. You didn't look directly at the untouchable unless you wanted to see what fear looked like reflected back at you. When they left, scurrying through the door like mice released from a trap, Hyun-bin remained motionless in his chair. Black leather gloves covered his hands, custom-made, medical-grade material that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He wore them even now, alone in his fortress of glass and steel, perched above San Diego's most exclusive waterfront. The staff knew the rules. 6-foot perimeter at all times. Meals delivered on covered trays, left outside his door. No direct contact. Ever. They whispered about him in the kitchen, he knew. Called him a germaphobe, a paranoid king, a monster hiding behind walls. Let them whisper. Better than the truth. 10 years ago, he'd been different. Younger. Foolish enough to believe loyalty meant something. The rival cartel had taught him otherwise in a white room that still haunted his dreams. They'd strapped him down, force-fed him compounds that turned his nervous system into a receiver for everyone else's suffering, then made him touch their victims. Made him feel every cut, every burn, every scream translated directly into his own nerve endings. The drugs rewired something fundamental. Tactile empathic synesthesia, his doctor called it, with clinical detachment. A permanent neurological prison. Every handshake flooded him with the other person's darkest emotions. Every accidental brush of skin transmitted their pain, their rage, their corruption directly into his body like electrical current. So he'd built this empire of distance. The Baiho Syndicate, once a criminal organization, now a $3 billion import-export conglomerate. Legitimate on paper, lethal underneath, untouchable in every sense. Hyun-bin stood, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The Pacific stretched endlessly before him, dark and vast and utterly indifferent. Somewhere out there, people lived ordinary lives. They shook hands, they embraced, they touched without thinking. He pressed his gloved palm against the cold glass and wondered if this magnificent isolation was all his life would ever be. Jennifer Hudson learned to be invisible young. In the pre-dawn darkness of South-Central LA, moving between her overnight shift at the hospital and her morning shift at the diner, invisibility was survival. But standing in the oncology ward, watching her daughter sleep, tubes trailing from small arms like terrible vines, she'd never felt more seen, more exposed, more desperate. The experimental treatment is her best option, Dr. Martinez had said 3 weeks ago, her eyes kind but useless. But insurance won't cover it. You're looking at $300,000. I'm sorry. Sorry didn't pay bills. Sorry didn't save 8-year-olds with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Jennifer worked 3 jobs now: hospital receptionist, weekend diner shifts, overnight cleaning crew. She slept 4 hours if she was lucky, smiled through exhaustion because that's what you did, what you'd always done. Her worth was in service, in sacrifice, in never, ever asking for help. The job listing appeared on a Tuesday. Live-in estate manager, San Diego, $200K annual plus housing, discretion required. Her co-worker saw her staring at it. That's the untouchables place. You know, Hyun-bin, the Korean guy with the import business? She lowered her voice. They say he's connected, dangerous. Nobody's lasted more than 6 months. Jennifer looked at Zoe's medical bills, then back at the screen. Dangerous men don't scare me. Losing my daughter does. 2 weeks later, she stood in the marble entryway of a waterfront compound that looked like it belonged in architectural magazines, not reality. Mrs. Park, the current estate manager, studied her with sharp eyes. The rules are simple, Miss Hudson. Never enter a room Mr. Hyun occupies. Never make direct eye contact. Mrs. Park's voice dropped. And never, under any circumstances, touch him. The last person who did, well, there wasn't a last time. Do you understand? Jennifer nodded, filing the warning away with all the other things that didn't matter compared to Zoe's survival. A black SUV pulled into the circular drive. The man who emerged moved like water, fluid and controlled. Black suit, black gloves, face carved from marble and shadows. Hyun-bin, the untouchable. He walked past her without acknowledgement, then paused, turned. For just a second, his dark eyes met hers, and something flickered there. Recognition? Curiosity? It vanished before she could name it. Mrs. Park's hand gripped her elbow. "He noticed you," she whispered, and Jennifer couldn't tell if that was wonder or warning in her voice. That's unusual. Jennifer's first week passed in careful observation. She learned the compound's rhythms like a language. The precise 7:30 breakfast tray left outside his office. The afternoon medications lined up in the bathroom like soldiers. The way every staff member created invisible perimeters around themselves when he approached. But she noticed other things too. The way his jaw tightened during video conferences. How his gloved fingers gripped the desk edge until the leather creaked. The tension that lived permanently in his shoulders. He was in pain, constant, unrelenting pain that had nothing to do with his body. On the 4th day, the board meeting shattered the compound's careful quiet. Jennifer was organizing linens in the nearby closet when she heard raised voices, unusual in a place where everyone whispered. Through the crack in the door, she saw men in expensive suits filing out, their faces flushed with anger or satisfaction, she couldn't tell which. "His weakness is showing," one muttered. "The untouchable can't even sit in a room with his own board anymore." 20 minutes later, she was cleaning the private hallway when she heard it. Rasping breath, desperate and wrong. She found him collapsed against the wall, his back pressed to the glass like he was trying to disappear into it. His skin had gone gray, his eyes unfocused and wild. Sweat soaked through his collar. "Mr. Hyun!" He didn't respond, couldn't. His chest heaved in short, shallow gasps. He was drowning in air, drowning in something she couldn't see but could feel pressing against her skin like static electricity. Jennifer didn't think. Thinking was for people who had time. She dropped to her knees in front of him and placed her hand flat against his chest, feeling his heart hammering like it wanted to escape. "Breathe with me," she said, her voice steady, certain. "In, hold it, out. Again, in, out." She waited for him to push her away, to recoil, to react with the violence Mrs. Park had warned about. But he went completely still instead. His wild eyes found hers, locked on them like a drowning man finding shore. The explosion of pain he'd braced for didn't come. Instead, silence, warmth, an overwhelming sense of calm that spread through his nervous system like morphine, like mercy,
like a miracle he'd stopped believing in. "What?" his voice cracked. "What are you?" "I'm Jennifer, and you're okay. You're safe." His gloved hand came up slowly, carefully, and wrapped around her wrist, testing, waiting for the inevitable agony. It didn't come, just her pulse beneath his fingers, steady and strong, anchoring him back to reality. They stayed like that for 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours. Her hand on his chest, his hand on her wrist. 2 people breathing in sync while the world rearranged itself around them. Finally, he spoke. "How is this possible?" "I don't know, but I'm here." He stood, helped her up, and didn't let go of her hand. He studied her face like she was an equation he needed to solve, a miracle he didn't dare believe in. "Don't leave. Stay exactly where you are." He pulled out his phone, called Mrs. Park, his eyes never leaving Jennifer's face. "Promote Miss Hudson, personal attendant. She stays within 10 feet of me at all times, effective immediately." "Mr. Hyun, I don't understand." "Neither do I." His voice dropped to something raw, something that sounded like hope and terror mixed together. "But for the first time in 10 years, I can breathe. So whatever you are, whatever this is," his grip on her hand tightened slightly, "I need you to stay."
The attendant suite was more apartment than room. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the marina, furniture that whispered expensive, a bed that could have swallowed her whole. It sat directly adjacent to Hyun Bin's private quarters, connected by a door that stayed locked but somehow felt like a promise. Her new role made her his shadow. She sat in the corner during tense negotiations, her presence turning his rigid posture liquid. She stood behind him at restaurant meetings, her hand occasionally brushing his shoulder when she sensed the tension climbing. Within 10 feet, his condition dampened by more than half. With touch, it vanished entirely. The small contacts became routine, necessary. Her fingers steadying his elbow in crowded yacht clubs, her palm pressed to his back during particularly brutal conference calls. Each touch was professional, practical, and absolutely charged with something neither of them named. Late nights became their sanctuary. After the staff left, they'd sit in his office, her in the leather chair across from his desk, him finally removing those black gloves. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about Zoe, about medical bills and fear that lived in her chest like a permanent resident. He listened with an intensity that made her feel seen for the first time in years, really seen, not just as a mother or a worker, but as a person who mattered. He told her about the White Room, about what they'd done to him, how they'd turned empathy into a weapon, twisted something beautiful into something that made him want to claw his own skin off. She didn't flinch, didn't offer useless pity, just nodded and said, "You survived. That makes you stronger than they'll ever be." 3 weeks in, she found him after a 16-hour negotiation that had left him rigid as stone. Without asking, she moved behind his chair. "May I?" He nodded, and her hands found his shoulders, kneading away the knots of tension buried deep in muscle. A sound escaped his throat, half groan, half sigh, entirely vulnerable. "I forgot what it felt like," he whispered, "to be touched with kindness." The air between them shifted, became heavy with want neither of them had acknowledged. When Jennifer checked her phone 2 days later, she found a notification from Zoe's hospital. Payment received in full. $300,000. Anonymous donor. She confronted him in his office, voice shaking. "Why would you do this?" "Because you shouldn't have to choose between your daughter's life and your own." "I can't accept this. It's too much." "Then pay me back." He stood, crossed to her. "Stay. Be my peace." "I already am." "Then stay anyway." Something broke between them. He cupped her face with bare hands, his eyes searching hers. "Tell me to stop." Jennifer's answer was to pull him closer. "Don't stop." The kiss was desperate, inevitable, perfect. They stumbled to the sofa, shedding barriers and distance and every reason this was complicated. He mapped her body like a sacred text,
experiencing pleasure without pain for the first time in a decade. She surrendered to him completely, this broken man who'd somehow become her salvation too. Afterward, tangled together in the dark, he pressed his lips to her temple and whispered, "Thank you." For what? For making me human again.
David Marcus arrived on a Wednesday in a silver Tesla that whispered wealth, his smile bright as California sunshine and twice as dangerous. Early 40s, impeccably tailored, American-born Chinese with Princeton credentials and a handshake that belonged in boardrooms. He was Hyun Bin's VP of Operations, the man who handled what couldn't be handled in daylight. "Brother," he said warmly, though Jennifer noticed he stopped at the regulation 6 feet. "You look, well, better than I've seen you in years." Hyun Bin's response was measured. "David, I wasn't expecting you until next week. Thought I'd surprise you." Marcus's eyes slid to Jennifer, assessing her like livestock. "And who's this? Your new assistant?" "My personal attendant." Hyun Bin's voice carried an edge Jennifer had never heard. "She's under my direct protection. Jennifer, this is David Marcus, our VP of Operations." Marcus's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Of course, I would never dream of interfering with your arrangements." He extended his hand to Jennifer, testing. She shook it briefly, professionally, and caught the flash of calculation in his expression when Hyun Bin didn't flinch at the proximity. Later, Jennifer overheard Marcus in the East Wing library, voice low but sharp. "Find out everything about her, where she came from, who she loves, what she owes. Everyone has pressure points." His lieutenant's response was muffled, but Marcus's laugh was clear. 10 years ago, I thought the interrogation would break him, make him pliable. Instead, the bastard became untouchable. A pause. But now he's found a touchstone. That's exploitable. Mrs. Park cornered Jennifer in the kitchen that evening, her weathered face grave. "Be careful around Mr. Marcus. He smiles like a friend, but strikes like an enemy. There's history there, bad history." The formal dinner 2 nights later seated 12, senior associates, legal counsel, Marcus at Hyun Bin's left. Jennifer stood behind Hyun Bin's chair as protocol demanded until he reached back and took her hand, pulled her to the empty seat at his right. "Jennifer will be joining us," he said simply, his bare hand holding hers above the table where everyone could see. It was a declaration, a claim, a line drawn in expensive sand. Marcus raised his wine glass in salute, but Jennifer caught the moment his mask slipped, saw cold fury flash across his features before the charm snapped back into place. That night, alone in his quarters, Hyun Bin told her everything. How Marcus had been his closest friend, his trusted second. How Marcus had arranged the meeting that became an ambush, had orchestrated the interrogation that destroyed him. "Why keep him close?" Jennifer asked, her head on his chest. "Keep your enemies closer. Wait for them to reveal themselves completely." His arms tightened around her. "I've always known. I just couldn't prove it." They made love with new urgency, desperate and clinging, knowing something was circling in the dark beyond their sanctuary. 3 floors below, Marcus stood at his window, phone pressed to his ear. "Begin phase 2, he said softly. "Frame the girl. Something federal, something he can't fix with money or muscle." He smiled at his reflection. "Let's see how untouchable he is when we take away his peace." The FBI arrived at dawn with warrants and the kind of confidence that came from airtight cases. Jennifer was in the kitchen preparing Hyun Bin's breakfast when they swarmed through the compound like a tactical flood. "Jennifer Hudson, you're under arrest for corporate espionage and theft of trade secrets." The words didn't make sense. She looked past the agents to where Hyun Bin stood in the hallway, his face carved from stone, and saw something die behind his eyes. "I didn't do this," she said, her voice steady even as they cuffed her wrists. "I would never." "That's what she said." His voice was dead, empty, somewhere far beyond reach.
The lead agent held up a tablet. Digital forensics show Miss Hudson accessed restricted servers using her credentials, downloaded proprietary files worth millions. The evidence is irrefutable. Jennifer's world tilted. She searched Hyun Bin's face for recognition, for trust, for anything that remembered the past month. Found nothing but the wasteland of old trauma staring back. "Please," she whispered as they pulled her toward the door. "Trust me, it's Marcus. It has to be Marcus." But he'd already turned away, his gloved hands gripping the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The federal detention center was concrete and fluorescent light and the echo of her own breathing. Her court-appointed lawyer was overworked and underpaid, already pushing for a plea deal by the second day. "The evidence is overwhelming, Miss Hudson. If you cooperate, we can probably get it down to 18 months. I won't admit to something I didn't do." Jennifer's voice was steel. "And I won't abandon him." "Who?" "Someone who needs me, even if he can't remember it right now." Back at the compound, Hyun Bin was disintegrating. Without Jennifer's presence, his condition returned with savage, relentless intensity. Every conversation felt like knives under his skin. Every business meeting left him gasping, drowning in the ambient greed and ambition that flooded through accidental touches, through proximity, through the simple act of existing in the same room as other humans. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, could barely stand. Mrs. Park found him on the third day, collapsed in his office, trembling. "Sir, I've known that girl for months. She's not capable of this." People are capable of anything for the right price, but his voice cracked on the words. Marcus materialized like smoke, all concern and efficiency. "Brother, let me handle operations while you recover. You need rest." The fourth night, Hyun Bin sat alone in the dark reviewing security footage, looking for something, anything, a reason to believe or a reason to let go. And there, 3:47 a.m., the night before the FBI raid, Marcus's chief of security entering Jennifer's office with a laptop, working at her computer for 17 minutes, while Jennifer herself was visible on another camera, asleep in her quarters. The digital forensics showed the files accessed from her computer, but she was unconscious when it happened. Realization crashed over him like a wave of ice water. Jennifer had been telling the truth. Marcus had orchestrated everything, the frame job, the evidence, the perfect trap. And Hyun Bin's trauma had made him the weapon that destroyed the only person who'd brought him peace in a decade. He'd betrayed her, just like Marcus planned. Hyun Bin used every political favor he'd accumulated in 20 years to have Jennifer released on newly discovered evidence. He went to the federal detention center himself, something he never did, couldn't afford to do with his condition screaming at him through every interaction with guards and clerks and the bureaucratic machinery of justice. She sat on the bench in her holding cell, thinner than she'd been 4 days ago, exhaustion carved into her face like sculpture. When she saw him, she didn't cry or rage, just looked at him with weary disappointment that hurt worse than any pain his condition had ever delivered. "Did you come to apologize or to accuse me again?" "Both." He stayed outside the cell, unable to cross the threshold. "I was wrong. Marcus framed you. I have proof, security footage, digital forensics, everything. And it only took you 4 days to believe me." "I know. I let my past poison my present. I let fear make me cruel." His voice broke. "Jennifer, please, I need you to forgive me." "Why should I? You threw me away the moment it was convenient, just like everyone else in my life." "Because I'm asking, not as your employer, not as the untouchable, as a man who loves you and was too broken to trust it." He pressed his gloved hand against the bars. "I love you, and I failed you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving you can trust me, if you'll let me." Long silence stretched between them. Then, quietly, "What happens now?" "Now, we prove Marcus orchestrated everything, but I need you to disappear first." "What?" "Marcus thinks you're neutralized. If he knows you're free, he'll escalate, hurt more people to cover his tracks. I need him to believe he's won while I build an airtight case." He met her eyes. 2 weeks, maybe less. Then this ends. And then? Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving you can trust me." She reached through the bars, touched his face. "I already do, you idiot. That's the problem." The safe house was a cabin in the San Bernardino Mountains, all isolation and pine silence. Jennifer watched news reports on a laptop, saw photos of Hyun Bin at business functions looking gaunt, hollow, barely able to stand without assistance. The captions speculated about terminal illness, about succession plans, about the end of an era. She realized with dawning horror, he was dying without her. His condition was consuming him, but he was protecting her anyway. Meanwhile, Hyun Bin systematically dismantled Marcus's world. Financial records traced back to offshore accounts, security footage compiled into damning timelines, testimony from Marcus's enemies who suddenly found their courage. But the physical toll was immense. He lost 15 pounds in 2 weeks, took medication in doses his doctor called suicidal just to function through basic meetings. Marcus positioned himself perfectly. Tragic how illness has weakened him. The syndicate needs stable leadership. Day 12, Jennifer saw a photo online, Hyun Bin being helped into a car by 2 guards, his body hunched, his face gray. He looked like a ghost wearing expensive clothes. She called the burner phone he'd given her. He answered on the first ring. "I'm coming back." "No, it's not safe. You're dying. I can see it in every photo. I'm coming back." "Jennifer, please. You asked me to trust me. Now trust me." Her voice was steel and love mixed together. "We end this together or not at all." Silence. Then, so quietly, "Okay, together." The Baekho Foundation charity auction transformed the Marina District Yacht Club into a cathedral of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers refracted light across marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the harbor like living paintings. San Diego's elite circulated in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, champagne flowing like water, cameras flashing for society pages. Hyun Bin sat at the head table barely conscious, propped upright by medication and sheer will. Marcus worked the room beside him, accepting congratulations on his impending leadership role with practiced humility that made Jennifer's blood boil from across the ballroom. She'd infiltrated as catering staff, black dress, hair in an elegant updo, minimal makeup that made her nearly invisible. Mrs. Park had intercepted her transport with loyal security, saying only, "Mr. Hyun needs you. We all need him." Jennifer circulated with a champagne tray, navigating through clusters of power brokers and socialites. Each step brought her closer to the head table, closer to him. She could see the gray pallor of his skin, the way his gloved hands trembled slightly against the white tablecloth. She reached his table, leaned in to refill his untouched glass. Her hand brushed his as she slipped a napkin into his palm. "I am still your peace. Trust me." His eyes snapped up, recognition, shock, desperate hope flooding his face in rapid succession. Color returned to his cheeks like sunrise. His breathing steadied, deepened. Before he could speak, she'd melted back into the crowd. Marcus noticed immediately. "Brother, you look better." "I am." Hyun Bin stood, steady for the first time in 2 weeks. "In fact, I have an announcement." Marcus's hand drifted toward his jacket. Hyun Bin's voice cut through the ballroom chatter. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Before the auction begins, I want to address rumors about my health and the future of Baekho Industries." Large screens flickered to life around the room. Security footage began playing, Marcus's chief of security entering Jennifer's office at 3 a.m. Financial records showing offshore accounts. Recorded phone calls arranging the decade-old interrogation. Marcus's carefully constructed mask shattered. "You have no proof that will stand." "I have everything, including testimony from the men who tortured me 10 years ago. The men you hired, David." Marcus pulled a gun. Chaos erupted, guests screaming, chairs overturning. His mercenaries, disguised as private security, moved to strategic positions throughout the ballroom. "Nobody moves or they all die." Marcus's voice was ice and fury. "You should have stayed broken, Hyun. Should have let me run things quietly. You never understood." Hyun Bin's voice was calm. "The interrogation didn't break me. It forged me into something you could never control." Marcus aimed the gun at Hyun's chest. Jennifer stepped between them. "Move or I'll kill you too." "No." She stood firm, unflinching. "You won't." Marcus fired. The bullet tore through her upper arm, a graze, superficial. Blood bloomed across her sleeve. She didn't flinch, didn't move, just kept walking toward him like the shot was nothing more than a mosquito bite. "What are you?" Marcus's voice cracked, gun wavering. Hyun Bin's realization came like lightning. She can't feel pain. Congenital insensitivity. That's why her presence calms me. Her neural frequency doesn't register physical threat the way others do. She breaks the feedback loop. Jennifer reached Marcus, calmly took the gun from his shaking hands. "You lose." FBI agents stormed through the doors. Hyun Bin had called them before arriving. Marcus's mercenaries were neutralized within seconds, the hostages secured. In the aftermath, Hyun Bin pulled Jennifer into his arms, his hands finding the wound on her arm. "You were shot. Why didn't you tell me?" "It's just pain. It passes." She touched his face, feeling his pulse finally steady beneath her fingertips. "You needed me more." "I always need you." He kissed her then, in front of cameras and society and everyone who'd ever called him untouchable, claiming her completely.
The Emergency Syndicate Council convened in the main conference room with views of a San Diego sunrise that promised either new beginnings or final endings. Hyun Bin presented evidence with surgical precision, financial records showing Marcus's decade of embezzlement, communications with rival cartels, testimony from the interrogators who'd been paid to break him 10 years ago. The council voted unanimously. Marcus was expelled, his assets seized, his fate left deliberately ambiguous in the way organized crime handled betrayal. Some questions didn't need answers. The FBI closed their investigation into Jennifer with formal apologies and sealed records. Hyun Bin stood before the council again, Jennifer at his side. "She will be my partner in all matters, personal and professional." Surprise rippled through the room, but acceptance followed. They'd seen the transformation, how the untouchable had become touchable and somehow more formidable for it. 3 months later, Jennifer brought Zoe to the compound for the first time. Her daughter's cancer was in remission, her body responding miraculously to the treatment Hyun Bin had funded. Zoe was shy initially, hiding behind her mother's legs when she saw the severe man in the expensive suit. Then Hyun Bin knelt to her level, removed his gloves, and offered his bare hand. "Your mom says you like art. Would you like to see my collection?" Zoe's hand found his. "Can I call you Uncle Hyun?" Something softened in his face, something Jennifer had never seen before. "I'd like that very much." That evening, he took Jennifer to La Jolla Beach at sunset. The Pacific stretched endless before them, the same ocean he'd stared at from his glass prison, wondering if isolation was all his life would ever be. He knelt in the sand, gloves off, hands bare and trembling slightly. "I've spent 10 years untouchable. You made me human again. Will you marry me?" "Yes, but on one condition." "Anything." "We transform this empire. No more gray areas, fully legitimate. For Zoe, for us. Done." The wedding 6 months later filled the yacht club with unlikely combinations. Syndicate leadership beside Jennifer's family from South Central, business partners mixing with Zoe's oncology nurses. The ceremony faced the ocean at sunset, Zoe in a white dress scattering flowers, Hyun Bin waiting at the altar with bare hands and an expression that looked like peace. Their private sanctuary in the compound had transformed too. The room from their beginning, now decorated with vibrant art Zoe had helped choose, comfortable furniture in warm colors, photographs of their growing family covering surfaces that had once been sterile and empty. This room breathed with life. During their first dance, Mrs. Park watched from the doorway. "He finally learned to live," she murmured to no one in particular. Months later, that same colorful room held a different kind of perfection.
Zoe slept on the couch, exhausted from a movie marathon, blankets tucked around her small form. Jennifer and Hyun Bin slow danced in comfortable clothes with no music, just the sound of their breathing synchronized. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The old life?" "I don't miss the prison I built. I don't miss being alone." He kissed her forehead, his bare hands warm against her back. "I miss nothing because I have everything." Perfect opposites. Perfect partners. Outside the windows, San Diego glittered against the darkness, the Pacific vast and infinite. Inside, warmth and color and life and love filled every corner. The untouchable was finally, completely, beautifully touched, and, in being touched, had learned to live.